Have you ever been discouraged, trying to do what's right, maybe facing unjust criticism for maybe not doing things exactly the way someone else thought you would, and here you're working so hard and you get weary and all of that, and then you remember how someone had come up, someone that loved you, and they showed how much they appreciated you, and it just fortifies you for what's ahead, and you can face all the criticism and all the discouragement because someone knows and understands you and encourages you. You ever wondered why that would be? It's because you're made in the image of God. And Jesus felt that way. We're going to be talking tonight about Mary's alabaster box. And the story is told in Matthew 26, 6 through 13. We've been talking about Jesus. He's been warning what was going to happen. Remember the big discussion in the temple? And then he told his apostles about the destruction of Jerusalem and the end of the world. That's chapter 25. And he's through talking. And as we come to this story, things are not looking good for Jesus. There's a dark and ominous atmosphere gathering around him. Look how chapter 26 begins. It came to pass when Jesus had finished all these sayings, he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days is the feast of the Passover, and the Son of Man is betrayed to be crucified." Then assembled together the chief priests and the scribes and the elders of the people unto the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and consulted that they might take Jesus by subtlety and kill him. But they said, "Not on the feast day, lest there be an uproar among the people." And then picking this storyline up in verse 14, it says, "Then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went unto the chief priests and said unto them, What will you give me that I will deliver him unto you? And they covenanted with him for 30 pieces of silver. And from that time he sought opportunity to betray him." And now from that dark beginning, things get darker and worse. And Jesus is going to face betrayal and denial and abandonment. And they're going to treat him spitefully and kill him. But as this awful story begins, we have this story about the woman with the alabaster box. It's between the two passages I just read. Matthew 26, 6 through 13. "Now when Jesus was in Bethany, in the house of Simon the leper, there came unto him a woman having an alabaster box of very precious ointment, and poured it on his head as he sat at meat. But when his disciples saw it, they had indignation, saying, To what purpose is this waste? For this ointment might have been sold for much and given to the poor. When Jesus understood it, he said unto them, Why trouble ye the woman? For she hath wrought a good work upon me. For ye have the poor always with you, but me ye have not always. For in that she hath poured this ointment on my body, she did it for my burial. Verily I say unto you, wheresoever this gospel shall be preached in the whole world, there shall also this, that this woman hath done, be told for memorial of her. I want you to notice he's in Bethany. Now, Bethany is a small village just outside of Jerusalem. It's walking distance. You couldn't travel far on a Sabbath day, and they say Bethany was a Sabbath day's journey away. Jesus was in Bethany when he began to walk toward Jerusalem, and you remember they got the little colt, and he sat on the little colt and rode on into Jerusalem, and those that had come with him, they followed him. It wasn't a long walk from Bethany down the Mount of Olives and across the Kidron Valley and up into Jerusalem, so it was very near. And that's where Jesus would stay when he was in the vicinity of Jerusalem. And I was in the house of Simon the leper. Well, Simon was a common name. You know, there's a lot of Bills around. People holler out Bill, and you'll see a bunch of people turn their heads. I'm kind of used to that. And here in this county, there's a bunch of Bill Boyds, you know. So that's a common name. And some of you, John is a common name. Well, Simon, it's a common name. And so to distinguish between the Simons, they'd say something. Here would be, this is Simon the leper. Sounds like Simon had leprosy, but he had been healed. They wouldn't have been in his house if he hadn't have been healed. And the woman came to him having an alabaster box. Now, alabaster is a white stone. And it's called a box here in our translations. It sounds more like it was a bottle. And so you'd take this white stone, and someone had taken this white stone and worked on it and carved it into a bottle with a little bottleneck. You can probably imagine that. Maybe had a stopper for it, but hollowed it out. And so that was a special little bottle. And you've seen little perfume bottles that are kind of fancy, you know. And so here's a beautiful white bottle made out of this white stone that someone had worked on. And it had very precious ointment. And you see how she poured it on the head of Jesus, and the disciples were indignant, saying, wow, this is a waste. And Jesus came to her defense on this occasion. Now, Luke tells a story that is very similar to this. It's found in Luke 7, 36 through 50. And I don't have the whole story up here, but the gist of it is here. He went into the Pharisee's house and sat down to meat, and behold, a woman in the city, which was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus sat at meat at the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster box of ointment, and stood at his feet behind him, weeping, and began to wash his feet with tears, and did wipe them with the hairs of her head, and kissed his feet, and anointed them with ointment. Now when the Pharisee, which had bidden him, saw it, spake with him, saying, this man, if he were a prophet, would have known who and what manner of woman this is that toucheth him, for she is a sinner. And Jesus answering said unto him, Simon, I have somewhat to say unto thee. And Jesus tells Simon quite a bit, but the gist of it here is this. Her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But to whom little is forgiven, the same loveth little. This woman was a sinner. But it was because she'd been forgiven of so much. She had so much love that she did this thing. She had an alabaster box. And she was in the house of a Simon. And this is Simon the Pharisee. And this did not take place in Bethany. When we look at Luke chapter 7 and we see where this is going on, this is in the context of Jesus being up in Galilee. So it's a very similar story. I tell you, the similarities of the woman anointing him with oil from an alabaster box in the house of one Simon, it's easy to get these two stories confused. But the woman that we read about in Matthew would not have been called a sinner. Now, he wasn't sinless, surely, but not in the sense this woman was. Let me go on and show you this. Let's go to the book of Mark. Mark tells this story. And it says, Mark says that the alabaster box of ointment of spikenard, very precious. I sort of highlighted that word spikenard. That tells you what the ointment was. The American Standard Version says it is pure nard. That's how that's translated. And then in the footnote of the American Standard Version, the translators say, maybe we ought to translate this, liquid nard. So it tells us the ointment. I'm not exactly sure what nard was, but it's a fragrant ointment, and it's expensive. It says, she poured that on his head, and there were some that had indignation with themselves and said, why was the waste of this ointment made? For it might have been sold for more than 300 pence. Well, a pence is a penny. Don't think about the little copper penny we have. Think about the minimum wage. You remember this parable of the laborers that went out and labored all day for a penny? Well, that was the common wage of a laborer. Well, that's 300 days of labor. Now, you didn't work on the Sabbath day. If you take 365 days a year and you take 52 days away from that, you're getting right near 300. This is almost a year's wages for a laborer. Now, this is very precious ointment indeed, isn't it? And that's what she took and anointed Jesus with. Now, Matthew says this. Matthew 26, 1 and 2. In Matthew's story, the chapter that begins this, it came to pass when Jesus had finished all these sayings, he said to his disciples, you know that after 2 days is the feast of the Passover. Well, John tells this story as well. And in John 12, verses 1 through 3, John begins the story this way. Then Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, which had been dead, whom he raised from the dead. Then took Mary a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. 2 days or 6 days? Now, Matthew and Mark, in telling this story, are not giving you a chronological account. Both Matthew and Mark are telling about these dark days that are coming on Jesus, these last 2 days he has where he's going to endure so much. And as they tell this, they tell about something that had happened earlier. John says it was 6 days. And also John tells us that the woman's name was Mary. There was Mary and Martha. Remember the sisters, Mary and Martha? And they were the brothers of Lazarus. Now, this Mary and Jesus, they had they loved one another. Lazarus' sister, Mary. I think of Mary as I may be reading too much into this. I think of Mary as a young lady. And she just adored Jesus. And he benefited and took comfort in her adoration. There's a story told in Luke. You've heard this story. Luke 10, 38 through 42. Now it came to pass as they went that he entered into a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha received him into her house. She had a sister called Mary, which also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. But Martha was cumbered about with much serving, and came to him and said, Lord, dost thou not care that my sister hath left me to serve alone? Bid her therefore that she help me. And Jesus answered and said to her, Martha, Martha, thou art careful and troubled about many things, but one thing is needful. And Mary hath chosen that good part which shall not be taken away from her. Why, Mary adored Jesus. She didn't want to go cumbered about all these many things. She wanted to just sit at the feet of Jesus and hear what he had to say. This is that Mary that Jesus called for when he went to Lazarus' tomb. John 11 tells the story, beginning in verse 1 through 3, and identifies this as that Mary. Now a certain man was sick named Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary, and her sister Martha. It was that Mary which anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. So that's the Mary. Therefore his sisters sent unto him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom thou lovest is sick. Well, Jesus went down there, but he delayed, and Lazarus had died, and Lazarus was in his tomb. And Martha had gone out to see Jesus. Said, Lord, if thou had been here, Lazarus would not have died. But Mary wasn't there. The Lord told Martha, go get Mary. And when she had so said, she went her way and called Mary, her sister, secretly, saying, the Master is come and calleth for thee. And as soon as she heard that, she arose quickly and came to him. Then when Mary was come where Jesus was and saw him, she fell down at his feet, saying unto him, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. Same thing Martha had said. And when Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews also weeping, which came with her, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled, and said, where have you laid him? And they said unto him, Lord, come and see. And then Jesus wept. Then said the Jews, behold, how he loved him. You ever been around those you love that were weeping? It'll make you weep. And so there's this very special relationship, isn't it, between Jesus and this young lady that just adores him. And when she was weeping, he was weeping. Now, John tells the story like this. John 12, 1 through 6. Then Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, which had been dead, whom he raised from the dead. There they made him a supper, and Martha served. See, Martha's still big shit, always doing this. She's still at it. She's serving, okay? Now, Martha served. Where are we? Here we are. But Lazarus was one of them that sat at the table with him. Then took Mary a pound of ointment of spikenard. Well, now we know how much ointment there was. There's a pound. So that kind of tells you maybe how big this bottle was. And anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. Now that's what the sinful woman had done in Galilee. Now, Matthew and Mark says that she anointed his head. John says she anointed his feet. So she must have anointed his head, and with what was left, she anointed his feet with that. It says the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. Just put yourself in that. Put yourself in this room. What if someone in this room dropped a bottle of very precious perfume, and how it would just fill the room? And that's what had happened here as she anointed Jesus. Then said one of the disciples, and now we know who started this, Judas Iscariot. Then said one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, which should betray him, why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the bag and bare what was put therein. It may have been, since Judas had started this, this may have been why both Matthew and Mark immediately, after telling their version of this event, tell about how Judas left there and went about to betray him. That bottle of spikenard, she broke the box. Well, why would she do that? So let me bring this in before we go further. You'd think she could have just opened it and poured the ointment out, don't you? But she broke the container. It wouldn't be used again. And the commentators are consistent in telling us that the reason she broke the box, and I know they're guessing here, but there's such a consistency here, she was not going to hold anything back. All of this was for her. As far as she's concerned, the bottle would be useless. It'd hold no more ointment again. And so she not only poured the precious ointment out that was very precious, but she even sacrificed the little box that the ointment was contained in to demonstrate the completeness and the fullness of this gift that he is doing for her. Now, as we said, Jesus defended her. Those in the room thought, wow, she shouldn't have done that. That's just, what an extravagance they're saying. But Jesus and Mary understood each other. And Jesus said, why trouble the woman? She hath wrought a good work upon me. He understood it and he appreciated what it was and why she did it. Jesus said, the poor you have with you always. Our Lord would not want us neglecting the poor by any means. But neither would he want us putting forth service of the poor as an excuse to substitute or to some way not have to pay him the adoration that belongs to him. Jesus said she did it for my burial. Now, in Mark 16:1, you see, Jesus, when he was crucified on the cross, the Sabbath day was upon them. They didn't have time to take care of his body. They wrapped it up and put it in the tomb, and then the Sabbath day you couldn't do anything. And so they were unable to prepare his body for burial properly. And in Mark 16:1, that is why Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James and Salome came to the tomb bringing sweet spices that they might anoint him. They never used that to anoint his body. When they got to the tomb, the body was gone. The only anointing Jesus had for his body, for his burial, was what took place by this Mary when she anointed him with this precious ointment. Now, Jesus had been telling them that I'm going to go to Jerusalem and I'm going to be betrayed to the hands of men and they'll despitefully use me and persecute me and I will be crucified. And Mary heard and Mary listened. Mary understood what was going to happen. She took it at face value, what Jesus had said. It's not just enough to hear someone's words, do we? We need to go on, what are they really saying? And even as plain as Jesus did, it's like the others couldn't, but Mary was tuned in. She listened. And so she anointed his body for the burial. And Jesus said, she hath done what she could. What could a young lady do? I mean, the men that were doing this were powerful and strong, and the forces were greater, and things were taking place. She had no way to prevent the tragedy that was going to occur. But she did what she could. And we see tragedies in our life, don't we? And sometimes they happen slowly, and we know they're happening. A person is suffering with an incurable disease and degenerating or something else happening that's beyond our control to be able to prevent the tragedy that's going to happen. But we can do what we can. We can always show love and appreciation and empathy for those that are going to be going through this trial. And then Jesus said in Matthew 26:13, verily I say unto you, wheresoever this gospel shall be preached in the whole world, there shall also this that this woman hath done be told for a memorial of her. And so think about that. Tonight, that saying has been fulfilled for you. You've heard that story. It's a memorial for Mary to do this. Now, what would we have done? What if we were there? If we'd had that precious ointment, I mean a year's worth of work here. Would we have gone out and broke that bottle and anointed him? And, you know, you'd like to think, well, I would, but a lot of us are humble. A lot of us aren't that tuned in. Maybe we may have been some of those saying, well, that's too much. He shouldn't have done that. And we'd be ashamed of ourselves now if we'd done that. But what would we do? Would we do it now? Well, yeah, now we would. Now that we know the story and we know what Jesus did, any of you, if you knew the story and believed the story now, any of you would have done it now. But we can't do that. He's gone. What can we do? Well, Jesus told us what we can do. In the previous chapter, he said in Matthew 25:34 through 40, "Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was an hungered, and ye gave me meat, and I was thirsty, and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in. Naked, and ye clothed me. I was sick, and ye visited me. I was in prison, and ye came to me. Verily I say unto you," now here it is, "inasmuch as ye have done it unto the one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me." Well, we can't do what Mary did to the body of Jesus when he's here in the flesh, because he's not here in the flesh. But we can do it to the least of his brethren, can't we? And so wherever we see someone suffering, whenever we see someone in need, let's remember what Mary did and how we can, by helping the least of these, we can be of service to Christ in that way. And just like Christ understood Mary, he'll understand. He'll know why you're doing this. And he'll be pleased. And others that'll see your works, you don't do it to be seen of men, but you know, people that do that, that goes out, it'll just be like an odor of sweetness filling the room when you do things like that. Well, we need to be a follower of Jesus. He's told us to repent, confess his name before men, and be baptized, and live faithfully to him all the days of our life. A part of that faithfulness is going to be showing kindness and love and encouragement to those who are suffering. And I extend the invitation to you tonight. Remember how I talked this morning? All of you don't need to come forward to be baptized, but all of you need to respond in your heart. I'm going to keep doing this, or I'm going to start doing this to be good for others. And so respond to this invitation as we sing the invitation song.